So last week we started the conversation. We were calling it Stand, and we're talking about this idea of what it means to stand for God. You know, no matter what goes on in the world, and I know every generation might say, "Hey, my generation had it worse than yours," or whatever, and new things come on the scene, and you feel like at times that there are that you have to defend, right, with your faith, or even if it's not your faith, you get in some classroom scenario with your kids and you feel like your kid's being mistreated, right? You have to take a stand at some point in time. Everybody has to do it. It's part of adulting. It's part of growing up. But we said, what does it look like in our faith to start to ask the question of what it means to stand for God in certain situations? And last week, we asked the question, what does it mean specifically to stand out for God, right? To stand out, to take that stand and let people know who we are and what we believe. And here's the thing, we ended with this principle, we're going to put it on the screen, is we don't stand out simply to be different. We don't stand out just to be different. That's not what Christianity is about, right? You know, I remember as a young kid, man, and when faith started to grow at certain points as a teenager, I would go get those like T-shirts that told everybody I was a Christian, right? Anybody have one of those? Back in the 80s when these things were coming on the scene, man, they were all the rage. T-shirts and buttons, and I had one that this might date me a little bit, but it was like Nike. It was a play on Nike commercials because sometimes Christians were not very creative, right? We always have to copy everything. So we go out and we copy. I know I went there. They copied Nike, and this shirt had these Nike basketball shoes, high tops, because I wore high tops at the time, and they were like leaving the ground, like, and it says Nike. It said Jesus, get right or get left, right? You know, and it was like a Nike play on Nike Air. Look. That was sad, right? I got rid of that T-shirt. I finally woke up, okay? We aren't to be different just for the sake of being different, right? Our difference is to identify with God. So we don't be different just to be different, and we don't be different when we don't have to be, right? We be different at times to identify with God, and that's the core of what we're getting into. Today, we're going to take it a step further, and I was cringing this week over this message. Because today we're going to talk about standing up for God. And this is one of those messages that I'm just going to be brutally honest. The church has not done this well. This idea of standing up for God, when something comes at us that's either we know it's not right, that God's not pleased with that kind of behavior or action or whatever it is, when it comes time to have to stand up, we don't do it well, okay? And let's just be brutally honest, because some of us in here are highly confrontational people. Anybody, let's do a quick survey. If you are I'm serious, so I want to see the hands. If you are a confrontational person, raise your hand right now. Just put it up. Come on, let me see. Some of you are lying this morning, right? If you're if you're not a confrontational person, raise your hand. Let me see those people. And see, I think some of you, you're hiding things. My wife and I, it's funny, people think she's the confrontational one, and she's really not. We learned this in counseling. She will confront because relationships are very important to her. So it seems like at times she's more confrontational than me. It seems like I'm sometimes not the confrontational one. I am. I don't confront sometimes in the way I should because I know I'm going to do it wrong, okay? Which means I'm going to get bad, ugly on you. And so I just kind of hold back at times, right? What does it mean to stand up for God? Can we do it? Because this is the danger today. We have so much around us, and people are either not taking any stance or they're taking a stance that's so brutally tough that it turns people off. So two extremes that I want to warn us about right now. And I didn't even flip to the Bible for this, okay? I'm just telling you, this is the life we live, the extremes. One extreme is that on one end of the spectrum, some of us are unwilling to confront. We are just simply unwilling for whatever reason. Maybe it's the way you were raised. Maybe you grew up in a generation or with parents or grandparents. I remember grandparents of mine that they kind of the stance was always, hey, that's kind of none of my business, right? The neighbor's business is their business and none of mine. And so this idea of confronting is just foreign. We don't confront people, right? Maybe you have this fear of losing friends. So you just think it's better that I don't confront anybody. Right? I'm not willing to do it just because I don't want to lose a friend. Maybe you're one of a handful of people that exist, and it seems like the church today that think God doesn't want us to confront. Right? You take that verse that tells us not to judge, and you take it a step further, and you don't even confront anything, and you're just not willing to go there. And that's a bad translation on that passage in Matthew. But when it says don't judge, it's talking about an attitude of judgmentalism and not paying attention to your own place in life, right? So maybe for some reason, I don't know what it is, maybe you're one of these people and you've just been unwilling to confront. And that's one extreme that exists. The other extreme, though, is this, and this is the tough one, the unloving confrontation. That you're unlovingly confronting people when you do confront. And so I don't want to throw you under the bus this morning, but I do want to make us a little uncomfortable that some of us, we do this a lot. I see it all over when I get on Facebook. If I told you that 95% of my Facebook feed, it feels like everybody just lobbing grenades at each other, I'd be lying because I don't know what the stat is. I'm making it up. But it just feels like that to me. That we've come into this age where we have voices, we can throw a voice out in ways that we never could even 10, 15, 20 years ago with social media. And now it seems like we're able to say things and we have no context and we have no relationship. And we're unloving in how we confront. And I think that is becoming a serious problem. I think as Christians, we are going to be called at times to confront, to stand up in a certain way, but I don't think that means that we have to be unloving on one extreme, nor do I think it means we have to go to the other extreme and be unwilling to confront anything. So how do we confront? What does it look like? How do we do it in the right way, in the right time, for the right reasons? I'm going to take you to two stories this morning. I hate to sometimes give you whiplash like this, but I feel like I need to back up to Genesis because there's an illustration from a man called Joseph that, just brutally honest, his life kind of parallels Daniel. So we're going to get back to Daniel in just a second, but if you'll let me, let's go to Genesis 50 for just a second. Joseph was the son of Jacob. His dad is one of the men in line. We call them the patriarchs. Basically, they're kind of this line of men like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that God was working through at the time. Their families, their men, they got recognized because in this culture, the men were the dominant people and the wives were just kind of along for the ride. And so sometimes it feels a little funny, but just understand, these were the men that represent the families that were of the lineage of what God was doing in the world, making himself known. And Joseph was in that line. The problem with Joseph is he was kind of an arrogant young dude. All right, like at 13, 14, 15, 16, he'd be telling his brothers how great he was. He was the youngest. His dad was a little bit older when he had him. He was the favored child, the scriptures say. I mean, Joseph, he got a coat, and maybe you've heard of the coat of many colors. That's where this comes from, because Joseph's dad gave him this really cool coat. I guess it was cool. It sounds kind of weird to me, but it was really bright colors, and it made him stand out. And he was a guy that got a little arrogant with himself. He was proud. He was probably that sibling, if you had one, that you just thought, man, they're driving me nuts, right? That was Joseph. Well, what happens is, interestingly enough, his brothers kind of have their fill of him, and they're out one day, and this is how bad it is. They decide they're going to kill him. And finally, somebody throws an arm up and says, hold on, time out. Let's don't kill him. Like, okay, that's a little extreme. Thank you, right? I would love that, brother. But instead, they come up with another plan. Let's make some money off of him. So they sell him. They sell him into slavery. And he gets hauled off to Egypt, and he's years in exile. He's put in prison. I mean, unfairly, his life is a wreck. He's away from his family. He doesn't get to serve as God with his people. And on top of all of that, they tell his dad that he's dead. This is the kind of guy, or this is the kind of life that Joseph experienced. Now, at some point in time, it's real interesting. If you've never followed the story, Pharaoh takes notice of him because God blesses him with some real intelligence, some real wisdom. And so Pharaoh brings him into the court and he interprets some dreams, and Joseph becomes a leader, right? And to the point that he's in charge of all these resources. And eventually one day his dad sends the brothers off to the land of Egypt because there's a famine where they are. And so he sends them, and what they don't know is they're going to go talk to their own brother about what they need to get food from their own brother. They don't know that that's who they're going to address. And so all these years later, this whole story is kind of coming back together, and it's this wonderful blend of watching God do things. But when it all comes together, Joseph finally reunites with his brothers, with his dad, moves them to Egypt, and they live there peacefully as his dad lives out his days, and they get to be a family again. Now, let me pick the story up right there in verse 15 of chapter 50. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, because he had just passed at this point, they said, "It might be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph. I love this. I'm a little worried. I'm a little concerned. Let's tell Joseph what Dad said, even though Dad didn't really see it. Verse 16. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father, not our father, your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. It's like these guys never learn, right? Let's keep just making the story fashion for us, and let's hope that it works out. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. I think he knew. I think, here they come again, right? I know they're worried, and I think it grieved him. Verse 18. His brothers also came and fell down before him. Can you imagine? He starts weeping. They're thinking, oh no, here it comes. Like he's mad. He's finally going to lower the boom on us. And he says, they say, behold, we are your servants. But Joseph, verse 19, said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? I love it in the scriptures a lot of times when there's a question asked, it is asked with the intent that you know the answer. So he's asking the question and he knows you're supposed to know. You're say yes right here. Yes, I am. I'm in the place of God. Verse 20, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive. If you've got a pen in your hand, I want you to underline that one section. But God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Verse 21, so do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. If I was to ask you right now, what's one thing one of your siblings did to you, if you have siblings, what's one thing they did to you that you remember growing up that you thought that was really mean, that was not nice, that was not fun, you put me through heck in back, right? I'll just say it nicely. You did all those mean things. If I said, well, tell me one thing, could you tell me one thing? Like, is there something that comes to mind? Because for most of us, probably there is. There's one time, one thing that stands out, one place. If you've got a sibling, you went crossways at some point in time in your relationship. It's just what families do, right? It doesn't mean the family's falling apart. It just means your kids. And somewhere you probably went crossways. We were talking recently, and my family loves to remind me of this one. One summer, I think it was a summer night, we were at home and Dad was grilling, and I was little. We were at elementary school, and I don't remember what all about the circumstances, but I had this bar, this piece of metal, and so Dad was grilling, and what do boys do? We play with fire when Dad's grilling. So I'm poking the fire, and I'm putting the bar in there, and I pull it out, and I think to myself, I wonder if that's hot. Now, I'm smart enough to know that I don't really want to know how hot it is myself, but I do want to know. So I touched it to my sister's hand or arm or something real quick, and it was hot. And I think about that. Think about the things that happened to you, and you think about Joseph and these brothers. How willing do you think you'd be to forgive them? I mean, hopefully my sister and I, we can laugh about that now. Hopefully sibling things like that, you forgive and you move on, and they kind of become memories, and you can joke about it a little bit. You're kids, right? But his brothers sold him into slavery. They told his dad he was dead. He was gone for years. He was living in a foreign land with foreign people, not able to worship his God. Do you forgive at that point? And if your sibling comes to you and they've created and caused that much pain in your life, can you forgive? Verse 20, I love this. He says, as for you, you meant for evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. That's an amazing statement. Look, it's not saying that, look, God just takes everything that's bad in the world and he allows it or he just even endorses it because just to show he's God. Joseph says in the middle of this really messed up world that we've messed up, God is still God. God is still God. He's still in control. In everything that you did, even though you maybe had a bad attitude or a bad motive, or you did this to me thinking you were going to hurt me or whatever, Joseph says, you know what? God was in the middle of all of it somehow. And he doesn't answer how, really. I mean, he just says God kept a lot of people alive. In other words, Joseph got to this place in the kingdom, in Pharaoh's kingdom, where he was in control of all the grain during the famine. He was in control of all the food, and he was able to ration it and help people make it through the famine. So people were able to live. But it still wasn't fun getting there, right? Would you go through everything Joseph went through just to have that position? But Joseph says, somehow, in the middle of all this chaos in my life, this pain you caused me, God is still there. He's still there, and he was active. And it reveals this surrender that he has. So here's the first thing I want you to pay attention to. When it comes to standing up for God, you first have to surrender to God. When it comes to standing up for God, the problem is so many of us will try to stand up for God, and we're not even sure who God is sometimes. We haven't made a surrender ourselves. Here's Joseph, his brother's coming in. I got to be honest. I'm thinking if I'm Joseph, maybe I make a law. Like I punish them, I put them in prison, then I make a law. It is no longer legal to sell your siblings into slavery, right? Like sounds like a good law, and I make them an example. I put their faces on a poster. These are my brothers. Knock it off, right? Maybe put them out in buildings instead of milk cartons or whatever. But think about it. He didn't do that. He didn't do that. Why? Because he had surrendered to who God was. In the middle of his pain, he could still see God. His surrender to God allowed him to stand up for God in a healthy way. When you make it, listen, when you don't surrender to God, you know what happens when you try to stand up for God? It's all about the win. It's all about the win. Because it's all about me. If Joseph had tried to punish his brothers, it would have simply been in that moment to make it about me. Look, I get it. There are crimes, there are things, there's tragedies, there's horrific injustice in the world that needs to be and prayerfully will get handled and punished and taken care of, right? But in this instance, so many of us, we make it about us in moments we don't have to. Here's a guy that could have. They sold him into slavery. They wrecked a major part of his life. And somehow Joseph came out the other side walking with God and going, I'm not going to hold on to that anymore. I'm not going to punish you guys. It's not worth it to me. What's worth it is that you recognize God is still in control in the middle of all of this. If we try to stand up for God without first surrendering, it will be about the win. That's why I'm convinced that in his famous book, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book called Purpose Driven Life. Rick Warren, a pastor out in California, wrote this book, and it just went like viral all over the world. Millions and millions of copies. And the first line of the book is simply this: it's not about you. Right? Purpose in life, purpose-driven life, not about you. That's what happens. When you surrender to God, you recognize it's just not always about me. It's just not that way. And when I realize that, things change. My perspective will change, right? So standing up for God, first surrender to God. Now, let's jump forward again and let's go to Daniel. I apologize for how small the print is. There are a lot of verses here today, and they all didn't make it in there, but hopefully you get the gist of these in the passages that are there. So Daniel, fast forward, life similar to Joseph. We talked about him last week. Daniel has been in prison himself wrongfully. He's been taken from his homeland, right? The Babylonians have basically invaded and tore down everything. Nebuchadnezzar made sure the temple was destroyed. The Israelites didn't have a place to worship. He's trying to destroy God in their midst. That's Nebuchadnezzar. If you don't know anything about him, I wanted to give you a little history here real quick. Nebuchadnezzar was such an evil guy that we don't realize how bad he was for the Israelites. Not just destroying everything, pulling down their culture, their lifestyle, trying to wipe them off the face of the planet, but trying to make Babylon, right, the place that the whole world would pay attention to. He wanted Babylon to be the center of the known world. You get a picture of this if you start to study and pay attention to a gentleman whose name was Saddam Hussein. Back when I was in seminary, I had a professor, and he was so intelligent, so bright, that basically in the Middle East, several of the countries made him an official tour guide. In other words, they would call him, countries would call him, and he would give tours for special people, because that's how much he understood about the Middle East. As he would do that, he was crazy. He would pride himself in going into places that the rest of us would never be able to go. When Saddam Hussein was early in power and when he was building up his nation, he began to rebuild Babylon. This is not a well-known thing, but you can find pieces of this. I'm going to show you how in just a second. He began to rebuild Babylon, including the festivals, and he would dress people in the dress that would have come from the days of King Nebuchadnezzar. And they would have these festivals and celebrate King Nebuchadnezzar. And eventually Saddam Hussein fully believed that he was Nebuchadnezzar incarnate. He believed it was his mission to restore Babylon to its glory. Do we have that picture? I want to show you this picture because here's part of how you could see this. He had these coins minted. And in the background on the left coin, you can see the face of what's supposed to be King Nebuchadnezzar. On the right there, just over his, was Saddam Hussein. He did this all over the land. My professor would go into places he was not supposed to go, or go into and take pictures in places he was not even supposed to have a camera. He would, I don't know how he did it, but he would dress himself and put a camera under his coat. And I won't even tell you his name because I don't want to get him in trouble. But he'd come back and show his students. That wasn't smart, but we thought it was cool. And he would just snap pictures around, and posters like this were all over the place with this image of what was supposed to be Nebuchadnezzar and Saddam Hussein. If you know anything about Saddam Hussein, you know what he did, what he was capable of. You now know what Nebuchadnezzar was like because the man thought he was him. That's the kind of evil we're talking about. Nebuchadnezzar calls Daniel one day and he tells him, I got to talk to you about something. In Daniel 4, Daniel recounts the conversation of what's going on, but he does it in first person like it's King Nebuchadnezzar talking. So it gets really interesting. Watch this, verse 4 of chapter 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. Isn't that great? I walked around my house this week. I didn't feel that way. I mean, it's a great place. I love my house, but I'm thinking, the guy walks like he's the king of the world already, right? Verse 5, I saw a dream that made me afraid. It's interesting. So I'm in my palace, things are good, but I saw a dream and it made me afraid. As I lay in bed, the fancies and visions of my head alarmed me. He's kind of eloquent here. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. What is this thing I'm seeing when I go to sleep? So then the magicians and the enchanters and the Chaldeans and the astrologers, they came in and I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me the interpretation. Let me summarize the dream real quick. He's having this dream, and in this dream, there is a tree that stretches from the earth. We got a creaky place on the stage. Can y'all hear that? That's crazy. In this dream, he sees this tree, and it's massive. And the trunk is rooted in the ground, and it goes way up into the heavens, into the clouds. So, and the branches go out over the nation, right? So picture this giant tree that doesn't exist, right? Bigger than the redwoods. And in this image, a messenger is sent from heaven. And the messenger comes to earth and gets some other heavenly people or something and says, cut this tree down. And they cut it down, but he says, leave the stump. And we're going to leave the stump there for 7 years. This dream is bothering him. So he calls everybody together and he says, hey, tell me what this means. Now, it's interesting because in this dream, even if you're not a dream interpreter, and I'm guessing most of you are not, unless you're interpreting the bad pizza you had the night before, it's why I had the bad dream. That's why most of us have dreams, right? But in this dream, you just think to yourself, surely somebody's going to go, King, it kind of sounds like you're the tree. No, they don't. Nobody wants to offer anything. Why? He's ruthless. They don't want to tell him something that they know is going to be bad for him. So why? You going to risk your life for telling this guy, hey, your bad dream is all about you? No, they don't do that. So it says, verse 8, at last, Daniel came in before me. He who was, now watch this, because this tells you a little bit of his intention. He who was named Belshazzar after the name of my God. See, he changed Daniel's name. Wanted to name him after his God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. Notice he says that, in the spirit of his pagan plural gods. He changed Daniel's identity. That's what he's trying to do. But Daniel comes in, and he's wanting Daniel now to tell him, hey, Daniel, tell me what this means. Help me out, like I'm being tormented by this dream. Verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. Are you like this? Like somebody tells you something, maybe you're having coffee and they tell you something you don't want to hear or something that's terrible or tragic, and does your first reaction show up on your face? Like you can't hide it? Like there are some people who just can't hide it. This is Daniel. He apparently is not hiding it. The king's telling this dream, and it says he was dismayed. Because remember, this is the king talking here. He says he was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. Now he's troubled. The king answered, watch this, and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. Don't be worried. Don't be worried. It's all okay. It's all good. You don't have to worry about this. Belshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. What? This is the guy who single-handedly is responsible for Daniel not being with his family, for shredding his nation, for ripping down the temple, for destroying their lives, for removing them, for changing their name, for trying to force his pagan gods on him. Daniel, I'm thinking at this moment in time, if I'm Daniel, you're getting your 10 minutes of fame. It's time to stand up and say, look, king, justice is coming for you. That's the bottom line, and you deserve it, right? This dream is about you, and you should be worried, and I knew this was going to happen, and you should have paid attention. This is what you get for destroying my family. And that's not what he says. That's not what he says. He says, my Lord, may the dream of those who hate you, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. For your enemies. Isn't that amazing? Like if I think back and you think back to times in your life where maybe you wanted to confront somebody over something, like I don't know, a teacher did your kid wrong, right? And you didn't like the way they were treating them in class, or your boss passed you over, or gave you a bad review, or I don't even want to go about the politicians today, but how about somebody in the drive-through line got your order wrong, and you just want to kind of tell them off a little bit, right? There's some reason that thing comes up in you. There's something about, I want justice to be done. Does Daniel not have reason to stand up against this king in this moment? I think he does. I'm amazed at his response. May the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. It drove me this week to think, okay, is Daniel being fake? Is he lying to himself? Is he being insincere? Is he ignorant to the situation? I mean, what's going on with this guy? Why is he so soft? Is he unwilling to confront? Is that what's going on? I think it's none of that. I think the thing that Daniel has come to grips with is remember, I think he's already surrendered to God, and so now it's not about just confronting somebody, but it's about the restoration. It's about this King Nebuchadnezzar coming to a different understanding of his life and what he's done. It's not that Daniel's unwilling or unlovingly going to confront. It's that he's now going to seek restoration for King Nebuchadnezzar. That standing up for God is going to require us, all of us, to seek some kind of restoration. Why? Because it's not rooted in us. It's not about me. It's not about the win. It's not about my win. I love this. Paul writes about this very thing in Galatians 6, and I want to read this quick passage to you. And we're just going to read verse 1. You can read this week again. Go back and study this a little bit more. But he says, dear brothers and sisters, talking to the Galatian church, he says, if any believer is overcome by sin, think about that. If anybody messes up, they do something wrong, they have an affair, right? They steal, they lie, they're not there for their family. Maybe they're vacant spouses. If one of your people around you, if they stumble, if they mess up, if they're messing up their life, and maybe they're being disrespectful, maybe they're being overbearing. If anybody's overcome by sin, if they've taken their eyes off God, you who are godly should gently and humbly help the person back onto the right path. You should gently and humbly Gently and humbly. Say that with me. Gently and humbly. One more time. Gently and humbly. See, I think this is the part that's missing. Somehow we have thought that any kind of standing up for God is going to involve a confrontation that really models the fight of the world, where I have to win. And I'm telling you, the scriptures say, Daniel shows us, it's more about restoration. It's more about that person's relationship with God, bringing somebody back around to the awareness of who God is and doing it in a gentle and humble manner. Gentle and humble manner. Daniel's warning this king, it's time to turn. It's time to turn. What the king doesn't know is the 7 years that the stump is going to be left alone. The dream is about those 7 years for him as king, he's going to lose his mind. And Daniel knows that, and he's trying to encourage the king and say, come on, king, listen to this. Look, I wish this wasn't for you. I wish this was for your enemies, but listen to me. Verse 27, he says, therefore, you can hear him pleading. Now watch this. O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. See, he's been an evil king and he's still prospered. And now Daniel says, look, I'm not even going to hold that against you. Let's look at changing this thing. Let's restore you to God. Let's hope that you can continue to prosper in a new and different way. You ever done that? You ever thought that about somebody that you know has done you wrong? Somebody cheated on you in some way. Somebody said something about you. Somebody stabbed you in the back. Is it natural to think, don't do that. Come on, let's keep going together. I want you to prosper. No, why? Because my first instinct is about me. My first instinct is to win. My first instinct is to stand up and make sure everybody knows I'm right? After 7 years, the king loses his mind for 7 years. It says he's walking around on his hands and knees like an animal. It says he eats grass. The text literally says he eats grass. He lives among the beasts. This is a king that had everything. He was in his palace. He was prospering. He had the best of the best. And he loses his mind. But after 7 years, here's the amazing grace of God. Verse 34 of Daniel 4. We'll close with this passage. After this time had passed, the 7 years, I, Nebuchadnezzar, looked up to heaven. My sanity returned. And watch this. I praised and worshiped the Most High and honored the one who lives forever. Isn't that amazing? Like after 7 years, God let his mind clear again, and he came to his senses. And that this time he's restored. Did he have to go through the 7 years? No. If he'd have listened to Daniel, if he paid attention, but he didn't want to. And he made a stand, but God didn't give up on him. Why? Because it is about restoration. Anytime we stand for God, we stand up. Right? We have to first surrender because we don't want it to be about us, and we want it to be about restoration, to seek restoration in that person's life. If that's the heart, then confrontation will at least have a chance at being successful. But if that's not how it is, it doesn't benefit the kingdom, doesn't benefit God, it doesn't benefit us. You don't even have to be a follower of God, to be honest. Right? When you stand up and it's all about you, it's going to go badly. We know this, right? We have people in our lives that remind us of that every day. Do you sense the need to stand up? Is there something in your life you think, I need to confront an area? Are you careful? Right? Surrender to God first. Don't make it about you. If it's about you, you're going to be for the win, and it's never going to go well. In fact, you know what's going to happen? Paul goes on into Galatians, say you're going to get caught in the same sin. He warns the Galatians. He goes, if you're going to make it about you, you're going to get caught up, and you're going to be in the same sin yourself because your pride's going to get in the way. Is there a place you're being called to stand up? Is there a place where you need to act with mercy and grace, seek restoration for somebody around you? Because it's going to happen, right? A child walks off a direction, you just kind of see it and know that it's going to be bad, right? A family member makes a mistake. You see their marriage tanking. Somebody in your community group, right, is an absent parent. It's going to happen. There are times where we're going to want to encourage each other and try to bring somebody along, but it cannot be about me and being right. It cannot be about making the other person think I'm better than they are. It has to be about restoration. It has to be about the person of God. One of my new favorite authors, a gentleman named Caleb Kaltenbach, wrote it this way. He said, you can have solid biblical beliefs, but commit heresy by how you treat others. I love that. You can have solid biblical beliefs, but you can drive it off the ditch by the way you treat other people. Are you ready to surrender and seek the restoration of others? Because that's what it means to really stand up for God. Let me pray for us.